Scrooge's Christmas Carol, Releasing the Last Chain. Written and illustrated by Pippin Lowe. Stave 8, Confronting Treachery. Terrified, Scrooge weakened. Instinctively, Marley wrapped himself around the human. Their shared closeness tightened as Marley whispered, "Close your mind, Ebenezer." Scrooge lost his grip on the tree thorn. As the spike fell, Marley solidified his hold upon his friend. Collapsing into Marley's embrace, Scrooge calmed his panic. Standing as one entity, the rhythmic swing of the point began to control their combined form. Invisible waves of a black, ethereal flow washed over them. In an up and down cadence, the two swayed with the motion, first stretching taller, then thicker. Back and forth they bobbed, as the wobble within the point never slowed. "Ebenezer, are you calm?" "Like a baby being rocked to sleep." "Keep your wits about you. We must stay in contact. Will you allow me to move us?"
"Move us? Well, where am I? No, wait, where are you?"
"Inside you." With this realization, Scrooge jerked stiff. "Ebenezer, we must stay in contact." Scrooge, without knowing why, understood. "We need to reach the point."
"I thought this was the point,"
said Scrooge. "Just the entrance."
"Jacob, I don't want to stay here."
"You will, maybe. Now, allow me to move."
"Do as you must."
"Release yourself to me, Ebenezer." Scrooge had no way of understanding this command, yet had no desire to stop Marley either. Slowly, the sway of the blackness calmed and relaxed Scrooge, so that Marley could act. Spontaneously, Marley began to control his companion's legs. Movement was slow and influenced by the waves of motion within the blackness. Even the darkness in any cave on earth would have seemed brighter than was the void of light at the point. Through the benefit of past experience, Marley followed the pulsating echoes. As they moved, the waves carried by the atmosphere went from an up and down motion to a back and forth thrust. Each forward leg action slightly lifted them from the road. Marley struggled to keep Scrooge in contact with the surface, running in place, as though in water. The backward motion of the wave also pushed them somewhat downward. As they moved forward, the swings of the rising pressure intensified. Then light erupted. "We are at the point of visibility," announced Marley. Together as one, the two floated above the road. Shielding his eyes from the light, Scrooge asked, "Why has the motion stopped?" "It hasn't. It has just converged here within the center." As Scrooge blinked several times so as to adjust to the light, he asked,
"What controls it?"
Marley pointed, then answered, "The Sanctuary of Innocence."
"A new mock?"
Scrooge asked, as he followed his friend's pointing finger to a tunnel of light hundreds of feet before them. The blackness within the point surrounded all but the beacon of light piercing the dark. As he began to speak, laughter erupted from the tunnel. Confused, he asked,
"Is the light rejoicing?"
"That within the light is in constant celebration."
"If it is not the light itself, then what is that delight I hear?"
"Mostly children," answered Marley.
"Mostly."
"There are pets and some plants in the sanctuary as well."
"Why is it separated by darkness?"
"The Sanctuary of Innocence is home to spirits never tarnished. They do not, and never have, existed within the realm of love." Scrooge jerked alert, which caused Marley to shift within him. Bewildered, he said,
"I thought love is the working force of our kind."
"It is for those that live to maturity. but not the children that pass before adulthood. They stay with the force of their birth, joy.
There is a difference between joy and love.
The work is different.
Which is better?
Better. The infinite consciousness seems to have no need for hierarchy. Its only need is one of provenance. Marley took a deep breath, then continued. Yet, I realize you have the need, Ebenezer. It is my understanding there are 3 energies that create a more powerful work than does love. Joy is one of them. However, that does not mean it is better.
Babies are born with a higher energy than they will have at death.
It seems humans need a boost at birth. Society is tough and often wicked in heart. At maturity, a child becomes aware of their work within the force of love. Before adulthood, they play, enjoy. It is no light task to bring a smile to most adults, but children provide that service. Their worth is much greater than just regeneration.
How do you know this? Have you been to the sanctuary?
None from this side of the road can do that, but they come here to reconnect with grieving parents.
Have you seen them?
Many times. Look, Marley said, pointing to the center of the bridge. A child approaches you now. They watched as the youth passed beneath them without even acknowledging their presence. As the child disappeared from the point's darkness, Scrooge asked,
Why can't we go to the sanctuary?
Like I said, it has an energy that we adults have forgotten how to embrace. If you and I were to travel the bridge to the sanctuary, the space between both mogs would expand with each step. The opposite happens when a child crosses over to the road. Their stride covers twice the distance.
That is probably good, since children are so small. But what is the method of such a contradicting expansion?
It is contained within the substance of the darkness.
Where is the logic in that?
Logic, Ebenezer. Humanity lives outside of logic and often truth. But maybe someday this curious substance of darkness and changeable space will be understood. Maybe, but not by either of us. Scrooge reflected upon Marley's delay within the point. As his flesh chilled by the cold of the darkness, he asked,
Why do we linger here?
Marley smiled as he replied, Ebenezer, do you not feel the tunnel's light?
The light? Will it warm me?
Marley took in a deep breath, which simulated life, then declared, This is my favorite place in transmography.
But it is dark and so cold.
Temperature is of no importance to me. The point provides a place of quieting. A restorative intimacy surrounds me here. It is the place where I am best able to reflect upon my progress. I find comfort in the darkness.
Is reflection not done within the Mog itself?
The task of outreach is planned there, but can be difficult to achieve without revision. Especially for the condemned innocents, their path to acceptance must be assisted by other spirits. Marley paused, then finished with, For me, the embrace at the point keeps me focused on my task.
So, the point is your solace?
My inner strength does drift, Scrooge asked.
Is it ever too hard for you?
What is hard is that I ever put myself into this situation, but even the difficulties are a gift for improvement, Ebenezer.
One can never have too many gifts.
The truth is, most people do not receive enough gifts.
Jacob, most people do not want difficult gifts. Can we leave now? The cold is too crisp for me.
I would like to have you experience the burst before we re-enter the road. Do you think you can continue for a while longer?
The burst. Will the excitement ever cease in this place?
For you, probably not.
If it is safe. Well, Jacob, just make it happen.
The burst seems to be generated by the distance between the point and the sanctuary. I cannot just make it happen. A certain rotation within this location occurs at the moment of the upward gust. However, like the ticking of a clock, that gyration is due soon.
Get me warmer.
You do know I am as cold as a rock. But I do have one fire twirler. I did not want to use it yet, but I will if you have to be warmed. Scrooge also wondered if he should spend the fire twirler on heat. As his teeth chattered, he finally gave permission to consume the energy flare. Occupying the same space as did Scrooge, Marley removed the fire twirler from his heart chain. The release caused an eruption, which burned a hole in Scrooge's shirt. Yelping, Scrooge cried out, "Warm me! Don't cook me!" Your pain is not deliberate. Marley paused before adding, I am too close to you to avoid a bit of burn. The fire twirler added both heat and light to the entire surroundings. As Scrooge watched a tidal wave of blackness approach, he responded, I doubt I will. But before he could complete his thought, the burst hit. The piercing zip of the wave hurtled the pair straight up out of the extreme dark and into the space above it all. The reaction from the two displayed conflicting passions. Marley delighted in the ride, whereas Scrooge cried out in terror. Drifting back toward the road, Marley assured Scrooge, I have you secured within me. Fear not, Ebenezer. As they floated downward, Marley pointed toward the Sanctuary of Innocence and said, Is that not a reason for awe? With a caution that neared the panic of a lamb tracking a lion in pursuit, Scrooge investigated the sight before him. The light from a dim radiance appeared on either side of the darkness. As he stared to analyze the visuals before him, peripheral crescents of light came into focus. Both the right and left slivers of illumination mirrored the other's glow. As Scrooge fluttered with Marley back toward the road, he realized the light of the point had been created by these two curved shapes. Their combined shine spotlighted the area where children entered the road, and spirits waited for the burst. As they descended, the pair viewed the entire area beneath them. The corridor of phantoms blocked the visual scene of the road, yet supplied an ever-changing display of spirits traveling to and from the abyss. All of the mogs were visible, with the plains of violence and the abyss of final transmography being the furthest from sight. Scrooge gasped at the vastness of the fields of destructive compulsions. He wondered if passage beyond the millions of fire twirlers might take longer than time itself. The two of them watched as lightning bolted up and out of the abyss. The flashes of blueness supplied the light within all of the mogs but one. The crescents from each side of the Sanctuary of Innocence blazed a blinding yellow light that illuminated only that mog. The colors of blue and yellow combined with Scrooge's heart to create the green light of serenity. Tears of joy overwhelmed Scrooge. Why am I so happy? It is the children. Light carries more energy than just color and brightness. Light also holds emotions.
No, it does not.
Of course it does. Just ask any mating firefly why they are flashing their tail.
Jacob, I have never had a firefly say any word to me. However, I will ponder the idea that light can hold emotion."
The slow drop back into the darkness of the point caused Scrooge to wildly blink with the desire for vision. With his feet once again upon the road, Scrooge requested,
"Can we leave now?"
without delay. But before a step could be taken, their connection to each other was annihilated. A fire twirler slammed through Marley looking for the quickest release from its flame. Both the blaze and Marley's grip on Scrooge were lost. "No, no, no! I do not need this difficult gift," roared Marley.
"Jacob! Jacob!
"Are you standing, Ebenezer?"
No, I am crippled. Find me."
"I knew I should have saved the fire twirler. I have no idea as to where I have landed."
"You are speaking at a normal level, so you must be near."
"I am going to try and hear my way back to you, Ebenezer. Whisper as softly as possible, 'I am here.' Then every few seconds repeat the statement, but just a little louder." Scrooge did as requested. The first two vocalizations were without volume, but with the third, Marley turned toward the sound. The slow amplification helped him to locate the fallen human. Bit by bit, Marley moved in Scrooge's direction.
"I am almost frozen,"
were the last words spoken, before silence stopped all movement between them. Only the darkness voiced sound. With each wave, a low zip could be heard as the current converged at the point. "Ebenezer! Ebenezer, move! Fight the cold!" In a feeble effort, Scrooge stretched his arms. Marley turned in circles trying to locate his collapsed friend. Moaning, Scrooge continued to move, then, without warning, screamed in pain.
"I just stuck myself with that dratted thorn you gave me. I think I am bleeding."
Before Scrooge could completely express the pain from the thorn, Marley grabbed his shirt. Then, with the mental strength beyond muscles, he lifted Scrooge back onto his feet. Scrooge stood stiffened as Marley once again grabbed hold of the thorn. Clutching both the hand and the spike, he said, "There are 13 steps within the darkness. Can you take any of them, Ebenezer?"
"Is there an option?"
Snickering, Marley replied, "That's my old friend. The cold is not going to change, so start moving your legs. I will guide you."
"Well, Jacob, I am sure not getting out of this freezing black motion without you."
Clumsily, the two stiff walked their way beyond the cold darkness of the point. While it took minutes for the road's heat to seep into Scrooge, they both watched as fire twirlers crashed about the fields of destructive compulsions. "We have a little less than half of the fields to pass before we will arrive at the abyss," informed Marley as he pointed to the distant hole. Scrooge watched as flashes of blue lightning bolted up and out of the cavity. A lot of acceptance is being created in that nest of fulfillment. Marley had hoped they would travel in silence until after he had collected the 6 twirlers his heart chain would hold, but Scrooge was troubled and in need of comfort.
"It is cruel to take a child,"
mumbled Scrooge. Marley stared at Scrooge, then asked, "Take a child where?"
"From their family, of course."
"I understand." Marley paused, took a deep breath, then exhaled with a sigh that exhausted his ghostly form. Stopping mid-step, he just shook his head, then said, "That loss is emotionally unapproachable."
"If it is unapproachable, why does it happen? Jacob, why do the young ever die?"
Marley purposely quieted himself, then said, "That was Noah's question." Scrooge watched as his friend struggled to find the next thought. Finally, Marley began to explain. It's my first memory of Noah. He was barely school age, and I was still wearing baby clothes.
Hard to think of you in baby clothes.
Noah had a cat. I think he just called it Cat, but the lack of a name never lessened the devotion he seemed to feel for the creature. Marley paused, then said, It was spring, May, I think, and the rain was non-stop, so we were playing indoors. I think we had a fire going, but I am not sure. Anyway, a newborn snake crawled under the door looking for a dry place where it would not suffer a drowning. Before it was even fully indoors, Cat jumped on it and killed it in one quick move.
What did you do?
I just watched Noah as he attempted to revive this 4-inch-long snake. But of course, it was not possible. So, when the sun next parted the clouds, he had a funeral for the serpent and he cried.
But you didn't.
It was a snake, Ebenezer. Do humans ever care about snakes?
Well, Noah did.
No, Noah cared about the age, the youth of the snake. That is what he talked about for weeks afterwards.
So, the funeral was not the end of the affair.
It was more like the beginning. Marley looked straight at Scrooge, then said, For the longest time, he kept saying things like, That snake never should have been born. What did that snake ever accomplish? And my least favorite comment, the only experience that snake had was one of terror. Noah was, without a doubt, bothered by the lack of life's promise of just being allowed to survive. He could not understand why the snake was born only to be immediately killed. To him, this was chaos, barbarism, and just not right.
It does not seem right to me either, Jacob.
The death of a youth. That death is about what it leaves behind. For a sibling, it often brings home, for the first time, the reality that they, too, are vulnerable to a similar loss. For the loving parents, it shreds their hearts, then forces change.
So, you think this happens because parents do not make adjustments when they should?
It may seem that way, but no. A child does not die so that anyone else will make revisions. However, forced change does happen after such a loss. Marley paused, then finished by saying, Some changes are beneficial, many are damaging, and at times they can be both.
What about the child? What about what they have lost?
This is hard for the human to understand, but the child still exists and has new experiences. They lost Earth's encounter, but still reside within the physicality of the infinite consciousness's creation.
But none of this explains the harshness of a child's death, complained Scrooge.
Like I said before, this ordeal is emotionally unapproachable. It crushes the heart as it numbs the mind. I have no other answers than that to offer you, Ebenezer.
But there is no answer in that. It is like saying it is because it is. Your answer is an escape from the conversation.
Yes, it is, said Marley, as he grabbed the tail of a fire twirler, then siphoned it into his heart chain. For a long while, Scrooge walked in silence, just letting his outrage build, as Marley mindlessly grabbed, then secured, every fire twirler that crossed their path. Finally, Scrooge erupted.
If it is a slap in the face to commit suicide, is it not an equal slap to humanity's face when a child dies and their potential is lost?
Ebenezer, we are just ants trying to understand the feet moving around us. Realizing this answer was not going to resolve his friend's issue, he added, however, no human will ever know the mind of the infinite consciousness until they themselves become the same as the infinite consciousness. Stunned, Scrooge asked,
Can that happen?
Well, let's just say the notion is possible. Marley cleared his throat, then quickly added, we all originate from the substance of creation. As Marley paused, Ebenezer asked,
Is not the infinite consciousness the creator?
That is my understanding.
How did it create itself?
I think that is like knowing the infinite consciousness's name, whereas we humans do not have the ears to hear it. Scrooge stared at Marley as he continued to explain. There is a similar problem in understanding how creation is built. Humans, and especially me, Ebenezer, do not have the mind or experiences to understand the concept of physically creating the self from only a thought.
That would mean thoughts are physical. There is no logic to that, Jacob.
And yet, the physical world exists, Ebenezer. It had to begin somehow.
I wonder if the infinite consciousness is physical at all. Maybe it was able to create the physical world because it is spirit. Just like the artist that paints never becomes the canvas.
Such a clever thought, but that is all it is, an opinion without proven knowledge.
You frustrate me, Jacob.
Our lack of understanding is not a foe. It is merely the restriction that allows us the desire for personal perfection.
That is confusing. So, we become perfect when we transform into a treacle called acceptance.
Acceptance is not the end, Ebenezer. Scrooge just shook his head back and forth as Marley clarified his understanding. There is more. Get accustomed to transformation, for it never really ends. However, the path beyond acceptance is too well lit for most to follow.
Too well lit, even if I close my eyes?
Can you navigate without your eyes, Ebenezer?
So, in essence, only the blind are able to become more than acceptance?
Find the metaphor in that understanding, Ebenezer, for the infinite consciousness's enlightenment dwells within that nearly visible but overlit root.
Humbug!
And therein resides the main reason most humans never become a creator force, their own doubt. Irrelevant conversation continued as the friends walked toward the abyss of final transmography. Blue lighting repeatedly bolted into the atmosphere. To Scrooge, each flash appeared to add vastness to the road. Finally, he made the comment,
We are not making any distance toward that fissure.
Marley just thought to himself before he said, Motion without movement. That sounds like a member of Parliament. They both looked at each other, but only smiled as Marley created what he thought would be a solution to slow legs. I have never had a reason to try this, but...
You are going to shock me, are you not?
I am going to move us. Before Scrooge could react, Marley pulled a fire twirler from his heart chain. I need you to step into my limbs.
Limbs? Tree?
My extremities, my appendages, my limbs. We need to be combined before I can use this, he said, lifting up the spinning flame.
Can you not enter my limbs?
Yes. Shall I do that?
Why are you asking? You have never...
Marley pushed into Scrooge's structure, then put the fire twirler beneath their shared feet. Instantly, the spin forced the two both upward, then forward with a speed neither had previously ever experienced. As they raced over the road, Marley yelled, "Faster than a horse!"
"Faster than falling off a cliff! Yippee!"
Scrooge howled, as they travelled at a speed that pleased. As one fire twirler burned itself out, Marley pulled another from his chain, so to continue their forward motion. Once the 6 flames were exhausted, they stopped. Marley then replenished the energy bursts before continuing into the abyss. This activity repeated itself until they were both at the threshold of the enormous chasm. As they approached the edge of the abyss, Marley forced a 6th fire twirler into his heart chain before asking Scrooge, "Are you ready to jump?" Scrooge's mouth dropped open without uttering even a heavy sigh. As if on cue, so to make the biggest effect possible, a lightning bolt cracked upward out of the hole. The power of the discharge shook the foundation of the cliff. As Scrooge steadied himself, he asked,
"Where is the bottom? How can I survive the fall?"
"With the rocks in your pockets."
"You have got rocks for brains, Jacob."
"I no longer have a brain, Ebenezer. I just have thoughts."
"Humbug."
"Is that again your new best word?"
"Oh, humbug."
"You do still have the rocks I gave you."
"See their tips,"
Scrooge said, as he pointed to the formations protruding beyond his pockets. "Good. Now jump in. The rocks will slow you."
"I have no faith in."
But before Scrooge could hold his ground, Marley flung himself into his friend's body, then, quickly, walked him over the edge of the overhang. The scream out of Scrooge was louder than the next lightning bolt. As he accelerated toward an unknowable future, his pants began to ride high around his form. Scrooge tugged at his crotch in hopes of alleviating the pressure the fall enforced upon his privates. And then it happened. He slowed down as the sight of the abyss came into focus. Waves of colour converged at Scrooge, while a buoyancy developed around him. Safely drifting downward, a lightning bolt shot past, forming a pattern that bypassed all moving within the abyss. It left only a charge of freshness, both in smell and tingle, within the cavernous shaft. As lightning continued to spark and bolt within the surrounding space, Scrooge observed the colours and meandering curves of the walls. The colours, every one with a metallic glassiness, intensified Scrooge's vision. Shining walls of vibrant yellows, magentas, greens, blues, and lavenders helped to light his descent. Scrooge sensed a flow of dignity within the hues, a sheen of splendour. As they drifted within a combined form, Scrooge finally slowed to such an extent that Marley felt comfortable enough to separate from him. Moving outside of Scrooge, Marley watched his friend plummet. Acting in response mode only, Marley swooped beneath Scrooge, then allowed his friend's body to pass through him. As the motion combined the two, Marley grabbed onto Scrooge's form. Then, and only then, did the weight of the human slow. "I thought it was the lodestone slowing you." Marley pointed to the walls, then added, "One cannot throw those stones hard enough to even make contact with this enclosure."
"What do you mean? What happens to the stones?"
asked Scrooge. "They just drop a few feet from the barrier."
"Should I remove mine?"
"No, let's not chance the result." As they moved downward, a plethora of spirits floated throughout the abyss, crowding the area with reflections of pastel shades that shimmered off their bodies. As the upper area of transmography carried a sober ambiance, so it was that the lower area, the abyss, glistened with cheer. Every sound, every gust of air, Every motion within the abyss bounced off the metallic walls, then returned to the ears in the form of musical tones. As the pair dropped deep into the hole, an undefined yet glorious song began to reverberate with uplifting emotion. Scrooge enjoyed the vertical coasting, even though the rocks in his pocket still generated an uncomfortable tug. He made himself settle into the annoyance. Closing his eyes, the melody from the walls surrounded his form. Tones bounced off every exposed surface of skin. His hands, being toughened by age, felt little, but oh, the thrill upon the face as the quivering notes made contact. Each tickled like a feather as it grazed the surface. While a constant storm of lightning bolts flashed skyward, Scrooge became enthralled by the forms rising up from beneath him. A confusion of soaring monoliths emerged. The complex combined the visuals of the colored metal with a system of structures designed for specific purposes. Pyramids of various shapes and layouts filled the entire base of the abyss. Within the center configuration arose the network devoted to the collection of acceptance. The layout resembled that of a twinned pyramid, standing bottom up with its apex buried. On one side, the purer cause acceptance cascaded into a motif of meanders, which then disappeared into the unknown. All the while, a flood of normal acceptance glided into a separate chamber within the combined pyramid. Scrooge followed the various meandering patterns of Greek key from one edifice to the next in hopes of understanding each building's function, except none were buildings. All but two areas were either right-sided or upside-down pyramids. One of the pyramid areas flooded the entire location with activity as spirits mingled while waiting for their turn on the walkway of transmography. 3 electrum, gold, silver, and copper pyramids surrounded a pathway made up of 2 lengthy horizontal crystals. Each quartz crystal had points on both ends, which met in the center of the walkway. Once a spirit poised themselves directly over both points, a blast of energy from the electrum pyramids converged into blue lightning, which then converted the spirit into acceptance. The festivities of the walkway by hordes of spirits created a visual confusion which dizzied the mind, yet the area reeked with enthusiasm for the task at hand, mogrification. While a captivating vision of the walkway continued, Scrooge noticed a staircase climbing toward the upper mogs. Each metallic step of the stairway had a different tread and riser size. Scrooge puzzled over this difference until he realized their size appeared to be controlled by color. The golden steps had the tallest rise, yet the tread was so narrow that even a child's foot could only use its toes to walk upon it. This gave the narrow steps a ladder appearance. With each progressive color of the rainbow, the rise lessened as the tread widened. The lavender steps exhibited the widest tread, yet was so small in height it appeared to be flat, more like a ramp than a step. A collection of spirits floated up and down the stairwell as emotions of delight danced throughout. What caused the good cheer could not be determined, but whatever it was left Scrooge smiling. As Marley and Scrooge drifted toward the love collection structure, above them plunged a cloud of cause acceptance. Racing at a speed well above the pull of gravity, the mass drew so close that Scrooge screamed. Just as he feared the collision with the love energy, the liquid divided itself, then flowed around them, and finally it entered the collection receptacle. Drops of acceptance flung all over the pair. Control over their descent left Marley as the acceptance took effect. Giggling, then laughing, he grabbed onto the edge of the collection pyramid. He released Scrooge by placing them both upon the corner of the tower. With legs dangling over the edge, the pair could not control their guffaw. There was no humor here, just the incredible lightness the acceptance gave them, which turned everything into a quip. Sitting on the corner of the complex, Scrooge laughed.
"That was quite a fall."
"From everywhere but grace," chuckled Marley. Scrooge just shook his head and giggled back.
"That makes no sense."
"Believe me, Ebenezer, most things do not make sense," he smiled, then winked at his friend as he added, "The concept is the tickle." Unable to control his laughter, Marley fell off the building, then dropped toward the 5 dens beneath them. Before Scrooge became affected by the separation, Marley returned, cackling. "Are you still with me?" Returning to his edge of the corner, Marley looked at Scrooge, paused, then asked, "Can you just hardly wait to die?" A nervous giggle erupted from Scrooge as he responded,
"And be stuck with you again? I would rather live."
Together they laughed and laughed and laughed at that thought. As the droplets of acceptance were absorbed by their skin, both Marley and Scrooge began to quiet their howling. The liveliness and the walkway of transmogrification demanded constant notice, but after several moments, Scrooge turned his gaze to the opposite side of the abyss. Focusing on a massive platinum arena, Scrooge just watched as a one-armed, headless spirit entered the farewell platform. 3 platinum spokes horizontally protruded out from the platform. Each was set at a 45-degree angle from the others, with the middle crosspiece being both the longest and widest of the trio. Atop the 3 platinum bars were humongous horizontal crystal points. At the ends of both the far right and far left spokes stood an additional vertical quartz point. Behind each crystal point, an upright platinum post combined with the quartz created a gemstone that sparked with the slightest movement. The center spoke did not have this feature. Instead, its horizontal quartz point overhung an upside-down pyramid funnel. Scrooge watched the one-armed headless spirit stand as still as a statue atop the platform. They both observed the area as it began to fill with a golden haze. The cloud, contained by its own invisible structure, blurred their vision. Some think that fog is the infinite consciousness.
"It is hard to envision the infinite consciousness being any kind of physical form," replied Scrooge.
"The reality is, you just cannot imagine it as a cloud."
"Yes, that does seem too simplistic. So, tell me, Jacob, why do spirits think that mist is the infinite consciousness?"
"Because the infinite consciousness personally honors the spirit that is brave enough to go beyond a hopeless situation." Marley watched as Scrooge's curiosity developed, then conveyed to him, "Once a spirit is within the farewell platform of instant transmogrification, they again become surrounded by the light of the infinite consciousness's love."
"Does it save them?"
"No, most often their acceptance is impure. Yet the infinite consciousness always pulls the strongest positive from the imperfect spirit. That best quality is then incorporated into the infinite consciousness's own individual spirit as a thought."
"So, the truth is, the instant transmogrified spirit also lives on forever. What, then, is the purpose of the crater?"
"It is better to think of such a spirit as being gone but remembered, whereas I am not gone, yet hardly remembered. So maybe that spirit down there is better situated than I." Marley put his hand on Scrooge's shoulder, then explained, "And about the crater. You do know it was created out of human actions, do you not?"
"Kind of sad how the uncontrollable event of cause release can destroy another's entire existence."
I am sure it was very sad for that spirit when it realized Aperto ate its head. The crater is an uncompromising mog." As the two sat waiting, without any indication of a threat, the platform exploded. Shards of light shot through the area, depositing sparks upon the pair. Marley gave the embers no attention. Scrooge, on the other hand, made every effort to dodge the flares. The attempt was valiant, yet in vain, for the sparks landed all over him. However, his fears of the flames were unfounded, for when they landed upon skin they had no effect upon it. The firestorm, though visible, was as ghostly in substance as was Marley himself. Once he realized this, Scrooge calmed himself to watch the platform show of lights. As the golden haze cleared, no phantom parts remained visible. A transformation into the center horizontal crystal had occurred and was being processed. A dull grey light began to form within that crystal. Slowly, the glow moved back and forth within the quartz, becoming lighter and brighter through motion. Once cleansed, the lightened acceptance flowed out of the point of the crystal and into the upside-down pyramid funnel. "That was an unlucky spirit," said Marley.
"How can you tell?"
"Well, look, only the infinite consciousness's love was collected," he said, pointing to the center crystal's flow of acceptance.
"How do you know that?"
"If even one bit of the person's love had been collected, it would have flowed into the two outer crystals, then been made into acceptance," he said, pointing to the combined platinum and quartz uprights. "But, alas, now that spirit is only a memory." A long pause developed before Scrooge said,
"Well, at least it is a memory in the Creator's mind."
Marley looked sideways at Scrooge, smiled, then replied, "That is indeed something, at least." The entire area of the abyss hummed with activity as the walkway of transmogrification again became the dominant visual. As the pair sat on the ledge, with legs dangling over the acceptance collection pyramid, Scrooge observed spirits coming and going beneath him. Directly below them stood 5 upside-down funnel pyramids, each of a different size, yet connected into one structure. The steady flow of spirits into each funneled passageway added to the bustle of the abyss. "Are you rested, Ebenezer?" Scrooge thought about that question, then counter-asked,
"Should I be tired?"
Marley just laughed, then replied, "Well, not if you aren't. We do have quite a task ahead of us, though."
"So, in other words, I should be rested."
"We will probably both need to be well rested for this. Drifting into that den," Marley said, pointing to one of the larger pyramid openings, "will require alertness."
"So, Noah is in that hole?"
"Yes, he is in the den of anger, or, as you call it, that hole. But time is on our side, because it does not exist. So, we will enter when you're ready."
"I get to decide."
"We will act upon your word."
Scrooge just laughed. "You are a mystery, Jacob."
"Most people are."
"And obviously, so are spirits."
Together, they just watched spirits shuffle around them, the action of the walkway being the most profound because of the periodic cheers of elation that accompanied every crack of blue lightning. As one spirit transformed into acceptance, the next in line bounced in anticipation of glorification. The process was quick, for it took longer to enter the walkway of transmogrification than it did to become acceptance.
Look, Jacob, it is the handicapped spirit that helped us."
As they watched the phantom move to the center of the double-pointed crystal pathway, Scrooge asked,
Will that spirit regain its legs upon mogrification?
What he lost was of flesh. What he gets back is in spirit, which has already been perfected. The 3 electrum pyramids energized. As the force built within the monuments, the legless spirit looked directly upon Scrooge and Marley, then spoke the words, Navalny Zelensky. Within the next instant, blue lightning converged upon the spirit, who then became acceptance.
What does that mean? Navalny Zelensky? Asked Scrooge.
I think it could be his name. Do you remember at the shoot when he declared we would never be able to forget it once it had been heard?
Yes, I recall that, but I did not understand why he said it, for names have always been hard for me to remember. However, I will never forget his generosity and the help he gave me.
And yet, he was not happy about your presence here.
Do you think his helping me was only to get me out of transmography faster?
It is a thought, yet at no time should you replace his act with his motive. The two are connected, yet never the same.
Which is more important?
For us that were created in flesh and blood, actions carry the consequences. Scrooge observed all of the happenings at the abyss, while Marley just watched him watching. None of the other spirits gave the living one or his ghostly friend any attention. Instead, they busied themselves with the work of their own mogrification, travelling in and out of the abyss as they worked to repair the harms they caused others. That is the easy work, for once the task of outreach has been formed, then, and only then, is the spirit required to exist within the pain of victimization. After a long sit, Scrooge finally said,
If it is up to me, then I am ready.
With the agreement to proceed, Marley moved back into Scrooge's form, and then slipped their dual shape off the ledge. Moving downward toward the far left upside-down pyramid, Marley commented on the den directly beneath them. Keep as still as a carcass, Ebenezer. We do not want to end up in the den of destructive compulsions. As they drifted toward the den where Noah existed, Scrooge said,
It seems like a better den than the den of anger where Noah is.
In the den of anger, one can feel the dangers. However, within that den, Marley explained, pointing to the largest upside-down pyramid, the oddest of happenings can trap a drifting spirit.
I do not want to get trapped anywhere around here.
Then yield to me as we move.
Am I not already?
Just do not flinch until we are inside the den. Bonded in form, the pair slowly moved toward the squarish hole. Following other spirits, Marley entered the den of anger. The juncture into the den siphoned the friends, and their light into a spiral. As swirls of light spun around them, Marley gripped Scrooge tighter. From the outside, the dens appeared to be short. However, once entered, an expansion of space caused a downward drop greater than that of a mountain. As the two whirled within their gust of light, less dense spirits moved past the living human and his dead friend. Either the shared gravity or lodestones helped to slow the pair's fall. Marley did not want to test which, or if both was affecting them. He was just grateful that a slower spin would help to keep Scrooge's stomach calm. So calm that Scrooge dozed off. Marley maneuvered Scrooge into the dense point, and then they passed through and into a cavern that covered an area larger than that of the entire surface of transmography. Scrooge's eyes burst open to a brightening blindness. The sunshine would prove dim in comparison. Instantly, a tickle developed in his nose, to which he sneezed with such a force his eyes clamped shut. Filtering the intense light through his eyelids, Scrooge watched as ghostly shapes whisked around him. As Scrooge clamped his eyes tighter, Marley moved the two of them away from the funnel's light. Slowly, Scrooge reopened his eyes to a mass of spirits bustling around them. The entire area appeared larger than that of all the upper Mogs combined. Together, Marley and Scrooge watched as spirits poured into the location from the 5 Mog funnels. Rivers of moving spirits developed, for each funnel seemed to create an invisible channel within the cavern.
Why did we have to enter by the Den of Anger when all of the dens end up in this huge lair?
Do you see any spirit moving outside of their den's path? Marley asked. Scrooge looked in every angle before declaring,
No, but what retains their rigidity?
The fear of getting trapped.
Would that make them ask for instant mogrification?
It is not that kind of a trap. Up above, a spirit works the actions from their life so as to create their task of outreach. This place is not that easy. To emphasize the issue, Marley pushed both of his arms out over the vast stretch of their visual space, then explained, Down here is about the invisible, the thoughts and lingering feelings.
I still do not understand.
Understand how what is in the mind can trap.
How can my mind become trapped? This is like a big sky country in here. There are no barriers, hence nothing to be trapped by.
Marley laughed so hard he could barely respond. Scrooge scrutinized his friend, then frowned when he realized he was being mocked. Marley, for his part, started to control his hysterics through deep breaths. Slowly, he calmed enough so he could answer. Forgive me, old friend. I mean no disrespect, but the mind is of consciousness. It dwells everywhere and nowhere in the same instance. The traps in here are within the lingering thoughts of the spirit.
How can that become a trap for me?
Because their contemplation is not on our path. Once presented with it, we either identify it as ours or find the spirit's thought odious. Both extremes can create an emotional confusion to such a degree that self-identification becomes trapped inside the influence of either the infatuation or repulsion. Often in here, it is repulsion that captivates, but nonetheless, the resulting bewilderment ensnares the outsider until they recognize, then calm the borrowed thinking. Scrooge looked at Marley, then calmly smirked.
That was so clarifying, Jacob.
Nodding his head, Marley replied, Let me attempt a different comparison. He closed his eyes, then relayed the imagery within his mind. Think of this area as London, and each of the funnels over there is an avenue within the city. He waited for either a concern or acknowledgement from Scrooge, but when his friend remained quiet, Marley continued, If you needed to go to a shop, you would not go down the avenue that only entered the cemetery.
I do want to stay out of the cemetery, but how could that trap a spirit? If it were me, I would just return to my point of origin, then go down the correct road.
And therein is your blunder.
The mistake is...
Turning around does not give one the ability to go back. These pathways move forward. My spirit of greed learned that the hard way, to the near suspension of its task of outreach, which was to try and save you. Scrooge nodded as Marley continued. When I first entered this area, I was so excited about the accomplishment of moving beyond the cycle of greed that I entered through the den of physical harm, and those two dens are not even near each other. But there I was, in a place not of my concern. When I moved along the path, an angry gathering trapped me in their suffering.
How?
They were living a shared lie.
What falsehood could control an entire group?
Ebenezer, individual naivety is a weakness that those with malicious intentions target. The group I got pulled into stormed about how another community was going to attack them, so instead they forged a war upon that innocent society. I personally could have dodged their advance to pull me into their thinking, but it was the sheer numbers of them doing a unified seduction that trapped me.
You were too weak to fight their influence.
Believe me, Ebenezer, everyone is too weak when social tyranny is made into a mandate.
How long did it take you to escape?
What that group did still haunts me, and I was not even the spirit that became personally trapped. But to your specific question, maybe a dozen human years. It could not be a century, or you would have already joined me here. Marley paused to grab a thought, but then again, it may have been moments, and it just felt like years. Like I said before, time in here passes without seconds. Scrooge slowly shook his head from side to side, then asked, more to himself than to Marley,
So, the mob weaves lies in hopes of conjuring up truths,
just like lawmakers
and priests.
Ebenezer, do you want to go to Hades?
Is that where I am now?
Marley just laughed and said, Thankfully, the afterlife is not as small-minded as are the myths of eternity. As they travelled along the den's lane, Scrooge followed the movement of hundreds of spirits. With caves lining both sides of the route, every glance brought dramatic activities into sight. Scrooge gasped as drunken holiday partiers tossed Oliver Cromwell's head back and forth. With each thrust of the severed skull, it could be heard yelling,
Christmas has been banned. I will have you beheaded for this.
The frantic screams from the dead ruler were overpowered by the cheers spewing from the rowdy cave. Dancing around, the cave dwellers drenched themselves in drink, while the abused brainbox flew like a bird around the cave. Scrooge wondered what it would be like to be caught up in that cave's frenzy, then quaked from his own thought as he quickened his pace past the area. Across from the head-tossing den, a smaller cave could be heard before seen. Uproars transmitted throughout the area. She is too independent.
I saw her cast a spell.
She kills children. She's a witch.
Burn her.
Burn her now. As they move toward the vocal outburst, Scrooge asks,
Should they not be in the den of physical harm?
Those in there are trapped by their anger that women must be controlled. They dwell within a place of verbal violence, not physical harm.
Women suffer physical harm every day.
Scrooge shook his head, then asked,
Is it not a social tradition? So well established it seems correct, and even desired by most governments. Yet there is only this cave within the den of anger.
Misogynists are controlled by at least 1,000 caves within the den of physical harm, one in every language, and dozens in every religion.
1,000? I did not think women were that oppressed.
It is not our oppression, Ebenezer. It is theirs. You and I, who were born with male authority, can hardly sympathize, let alone empathize with the fetters placed upon women at birth.
But without women, would there even be men?
Marley just chuckled, then said, Earth is full of conflicting circumstances. The truth and lies we live determine our reality, yet only love frees one from the influence of the others.
That sounds like a gravestone saying, Jacob, do you actually think people need to be freed from the influence of truth?
Both truth and lies are abstract. Like an opinion, they hold us strong, yet both blur reality.
What is reality if it is not either truth or lie?
Reality is only experiences, and they are also abstract.
Wait on that one, Jacob. Truth carries the facts, so...
And yet, a good liar always weaves facts into their deceptive tales as well. 3 lies and a truth often carries the mind to a point of realism.
I think you have lost your wits about this one.
Half-witted or not, love, not truth, is the binding element of acceptance, insisted Marley.
Is love possible within a falsehood?
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of the white lie? One where sparing another's feelings warrants a deception.
Everyone knows those are just pleasantries.
That does not take away from the deceit.
It feels like humanity is constantly walking in quicksand, condemned no matter what.
Saved no matter what, that is the reality, for it is not quicksand, but excessive pride that slows mogrification, corrected Marley,
except for those at the farewell platform.
And they made that choice, Ebenezer.
Choices without options are not choices.
Marley nodded his head in agreement. As they moved beyond the women-haters, Scrooge thought about the mother who gave him life, but no nurturing, and then the sister, Fanny, who gave him nurturing, but was also taken from life. Both remembrances of women who began his existence. Throughout a lifetime, the hardship of their passing developed into a personal strength for Scrooge. He always felt their invisible companionship, their support, but now it only left him sad, burdened by the loss of them. As much as the abyss above the dens reeked of acceptance, the actual dens played out in vicious destructions. The next cave was less hectic, for it contained only 2 spirits, but those 2 played in wicked cruelty. And yet, that was not the shock of the kitchen table scene. The terror of watching 2 James Maxeys, one cowering while the other attacked, halted Scrooge. James slammed his fist on the table, then yelled into the face of James,
"You think you're a bit faker? Give me that coin."
The cowering James slowly placed the counterfeit coin upon the table, to which the aggressive James snatched the coin up, then whispered into the prey's ear,
"If you ever again go bug hunting without my approval, I will end you."
Looking at the coin, he added, "This coin's not worth its metal." Tossing it back to the table, the wicked one retreated, but just for an instant. The next moment cleared way for a repeat, but this time the 2 Jameses reversed roles. The submissive James turned into the aggressor, while the previously belligerent James prepared to be attacked. Scrooge stared at Marley. As a slight grin developed on his friend's face, he asked,
"What mayhem will their action cure?"
"Lack of empathy." Scrooge scratched the top of his head as Marley explained, "There is no fear greater than the fear we can create within ourselves." Scrooge did not understand the connection.
"So, they want the greatest of terrors."
Emotion always provides the perfect potential for action.
Again, what is the benefit of ultimate self-terror?
To learn the role of the victim. Marley could tell he was once again falling short in his explanation, so he refocused his answer. What you see here is an actual event of anger that James placed upon someone in his control. Often, the original victim is replaced by another representation of the angry spirit. Why? Empathy. James, the victim, knows exactly what is in the mind of James, the oppressor, and because each knows the other, what is slamming down upon that table is not about coins or nighttime thievery.
Are his thoughts more like what he did to Noah?
Exactly. Right now, that timid James is in fear for his life.
Does this chain of events ever end?
Yes, of course, but only when both Jameses agree that neither wants to be the victim or assailant.
That seems...
Scrooge stumbled to find the thought, but then just said, weak. The two travelled past dozens of caves before they finally stood in front of Noah's. Drenched in blood, Noah never hesitated in the task of slaughter to acknowledge the intruders in his cave. From one James Maxey to the next, he slammed the villain's head into the same Newgate bars that had ended his own being. Then, as with him, Noah forced a wrist onto a prisoner made Bob, causing blood to spurt beyond the confinements of the cave. As one Maxey moaned to death, another appeared, to which Noah repeated the murdering. Within a breath of time, dangling from the bars of the enclosure were nearly a dozen dying Maxeys. Blood was the colour of the cavern. Shattered, Marley collapsed. Lying at Scrooge's feet, every chain he had ever carried returned. "It's the curse," he mumbled.
"Jacob, your predicament."
Scrooge's voice withered as he watched Marley settle into his bindings. As each quieted within their personal crisis, Marley's chest erupted. Every contained fire twirler exploded, resulting in his freedom from the bondage. Rising to his feet, he directed to Scrooge, "Stand back. Alito's curse is without mercy."
"You promised, Tient, you would use the fire twirlers to save me."
"I am helping you. Can you leave the den without me?" Marley waited but a moment before he again ordered, "Now, stay back. Noah will be unpredictable."
"Can Noah be made whole?"
"The curse is the hardship that binds many condemned innocents to their injustice. Noah struggles to free himself from the court's shame."
"So, Noah's focus is not on wanting to murder James Maxey."
"Oh, he wants to kill him, but the driving force is the governmental abuse that I set upon him."
"So, why are you not the one being slain?"
"He knows nothing of my involvement, yet it may not help him anyway, for it is the control from the kingdom that shackled Noah. Alito's curse is the heavy hand of injustice, whereas my treason against him constricts me, not him."
"So, how do we end the heavy hand? Do we have to confront Alito?"
"He does dwell within the crater, and the curse within transmography is attached to his confinement there. However, none have cast a view upon Alito for nearly 2 centuries.
"Why?"
"He has administered justice upon himself."
"Self-justice? That is mysterious. I thought all spirits either become acceptance or perish upon instant transmogrification."
Alito died after visiting his best friend, Matthew Hale, on a Christmas day in the late 1600s. His entanglement released 2 self-created spirits that went to the crater. They were both so cantankerous, neither would allow the other to climb to the ledge where cos are formed.
"How could any person have 2 spirits in the same mock?"
"Arrogance. Alito was so cheeky he created 2 different rationalizations and 2 methods of harming the blameless, while claiming the authority of the infinite consciousness's virtue." Then, to emphasize the barrister's nastiness, Marley finished with, even children were not safe from his vicious wrath.
So, he now struggles within the crater?
Each of his spirits has currently ensnared the other at the bottom of the lake of flames.
Will one ever release the other?
Marley answered with a question. Does infinity have a time restraint?
If there is no time in transmography, then there is no infinity.
You are learning, Ebenezer, but leave it be. These issues are too complicated, and we have a task.
Your telling me to leave it makes me want to just jump on top of it.
Yes, that is good bait for a fish like yourself, Marley quipped.
So, what do we do to help Noah?
Tell him the truth. Marley stared at Scrooge, then admitted, I wish you could do this for me, but he has to hear my truth from me.
Will that cure Alito's curse?
The curse binds him now, but the truth does light the path toward freedom. We need to help Noah break through his trance. Only then will he be able to view the light of the path.
Is the truth that powerful?
Only if it is vacant of lying facts. Marley approached Noah, but no recognition from his sibling appeared. Instead, Noah raised his eyes to the pair standing before him, then hissed blood upon them.